Yeah, but that's also a clear example of why I feel like the strategy that they're employing may not necessarily be the best, because he is trying to draw a clear distinction between the way that Trump handles things and the way that he would handle, especially the pandemic. And he has accused Trump in the past of being incapable of taking responsibility and admitting that he did something wrong, taking responsibility for the pandemic. Where he wants to blame China and he wants to blame anything else. What better way than to say, here's a clear distinction between us. This man can't even admit that he made a mistake with the pandemic after thousands of lives have killed. And then within the context of talking about the crime bill, he could have mentioned that. I'm not saying that he should mention that he apologizes for it if it's not being discussed, but it was specifically discussed, his history and his vote on the crime bill. He could have tried to draw a distinction that says, I'm sorry for it. It affected a lot of lives. Being the big person here and admitting that I made a mistake, we collectively made a mistake, something that this other president is incapable of doing, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, and why you're not advising the presidential campaign right now, it's beyond me.
I would have advised him to step down and let Bernie run.
Maybe that's why they didn't call.
You're listening to The Brown Perspective. Welcome. This is RO, and I'm here with my good friend Eduardo. ¿Cómo estamos?
Estamos bien, aquí, listos, 10 days from the election.
10 days. Did you vote already?
No, not yet, actually. We are doing a little family discussion on the ballot initiatives later today. So probably finalize my ballot between today and tomorrow, and then vote this week.
Yeah, same here. I have mine ready. I think I'm almost done. There's just a few of the propositions that I have to go back and revisit just to make sure that I don't change my mind on them. I already know how I'm leaning, but it's like when I used to take tests in school, I wouldn't submit it until the end, even if I finished like 20 minutes before time, because I wanted to make sure I double checked answers. And same thing here. I'm just waiting. But I won't wait till the end. I do want to send them in with enough time. But I think we do want to spend a little time.
And before we do that, I also want to make a shameless plug for the conversation we had on the ballots initiatives here in California. We provided a couple of resources that we hope can help you think through where you stand on the issues as well.
That's right. So we're going to do a quick take here on the last presidential debate. What was your overall take? Do you think Biden won, lost, came out even?
I think he won. I think he came out stronger, better able to articulate his vision, and also just counterpunch Trump's comments and efforts. So I thought that overall, first of all, it was definitely a better debate than the first one we saw. But I do think that Biden showed that he was the best candidate. More importantly, he didn't do harm to his prospects, since he is, according to polls, and we know that we all are still very skeptical about the polls, but he didn't say anything that was too controversial that could be considered an October surprise as we get close to the closing of the polls.
That's right. And I do also agree. I agree with you. I think he came out with a lot more energy. Whatever drug they gave him beforehand worked better this time around.
Steroids.
Whatever he's on, it worked, because he was sharp. He was on it. And it also helped that Trump wasn't interrupting him and interrupting his train of thought. Because I think when he had to think on his feet and pivot and respond to Trump, I think that's when he was getting knocked off his game last time. But to the extent that I can say that he won, sure, he won, but what or who did he really win over? I don't know, right? We can make the claim that he won the debate. Does that make a difference? Because I think most people that are watching these debates at this point already know which way they're leaning. It's a possibility that a small percentage of people were fed up with Trump trying to just make it more about a personality fight, about who's more corrupt, because that's really what it came down to in certain areas. But at least Biden was the one that kept looking at the people and saying, look, I'm going to be the president for both red states and blue states, and I care about the American people. And he was at least making that effort. Maybe that helps him with some voters. It's hard to say though. I am of the opinion that most people have already made up their mind, so any gain will be insignificant.
Yeah, although when you think about how small the margins can be in some of the battleground states, I think, just convincing a few hundred people to vote your way could make a difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. If it comes down to to a few thousand votes that make the difference, then maybe it's just the people that at this point were sick of Trump, tired of his circus. It's hard to say. Those people would have already come to that conclusion before because of his handling of the pandemic. Now,
Hmm.
I am known for criticizing the Democrats a lot, but yesterday Biden at least did catch my attention with a few of the things that he said. Now he was
Ooh.
talking about doing criminal justice reform,
Hmm.
making it so that we had a better way of dealing with the number of people that we incarcerate, especially due to drug offenses, and trying to be better about that. He also mentioned that his plan for healthcare would have a public option.
Hmm.
And then the tax plan, right? So he's been saying the tax plan is if you make $400,000 or less, then you will not your taxes will not go up. So he's trying to reverse some of the tax cuts that Trump did for the wealthiest Americans. So at least those things, I don't know if very likely he's saying them just because he wants to get the votes. It's hard to say whether or not he will actually push for these things, especially if he doesn't have the Senate. I mean, if he doesn't have the Senate, nothing is happening. Like even if Biden wins, they won't be.
Very little.
Yeah, exactly. Like might as well do nothing for 4 years.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah, but if it does get the Senate, and then hard to say if he would actually push for a public option, but at least he's talking about it, right? So maybe
Hmm.
that's something. At least it caught my attention. I am skeptical of these politicians because they'll just say whatever it is politically convenient to get support. But I'll keep an eye on those things.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to get those things out from the debate. And I think a public option does make sense because, in some ways, there's certain things that the government can do well. And one of those things is a massive healthcare program like Medicare, like Social Security, where we can leverage the size of the government and also the resources and the people who can benefit from that type of plan.
Yeah, the one part that was frustrating about that exchange, though, about the healthcare exchange, was that Trump tried to label him a socialist takeover of healthcare, and then
Bernie,
yeah,
Bernie.
and then Biden, instead of at least trying to push back and saying what's wrong with providing healthcare for the entire nation, he just ran away from it, and he also took the stance that no, 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 this is not socialized healthcare. This isn't like they still scare people with that word, socialized
Yeah.
medicine. But most of the country is for that at this point. I mean, the polls show that Americans are overwhelmingly in favor of universal health care. So in this case, it's both politicians that try to pretend like the big boogeyman is still socialism, and if we have universal health care, then we're gonna go towards socialism. And I know those things are still effective, but I don't know how effective or how much more effective they're going to be in the next few years because the population is overwhelmingly in favor of these things. At least when you ask them about it in polls,
Hmm.
the problem you run into then is that you can easily scare people into voting against that. They might be for it, but once you tell them socialism, right? When you start using those keywords, once you tell them your taxes are gonna go up or you're gonna have to wait 10 hours in line to see a doctor and scaring them, a lot of them change their mind. But most of the nation is in favor of universal healthcare.
Yeah, because it makes sense. And I think the more we realize that the healthier we are as a society, the better we are. And I think going back to some of the conversations that we're having about what the tech companies, the Lyfts and the Ubers of the world are trying to do here in California and are doing across the country is that why why does our healthcare have to depend on whether or not we're employed? Why can't we just have the ability to have access to healthcare and then, we don't have to worry whether or not we're employed or unemployed, but obviously will stay healthy. And I think for the most part, people want to be gainfully employed and do things for themselves and their families. So yeah, so maybe eventually we'll get to that place where healthcare is not tied to who you work for, but it's just a right a service that's provided just because we have the incentives to keep everyone and as many people as possible healthy.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. It's pretty ridiculous, honestly, if you think about it, that we do have that it's tied to our employment, and that there is no way to get it from the government if we want to get insurance through a public option. And
Yeah,
again,
unless you're
it
really poor or you're really old.
yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah, and then you get medical.
Hmm.
But again, that just goes to the power of the health insurance industry, that they are the middleman, and as long as they're in the middle, then they're gonna fight tooth and nail to stay in that position, because that's how they make their money. They're just right in the middle, gouging people, price
Hmm.
gouging. Uh, the other thing, look, Trump, the guy's a clown, right? But at least you got to give him credit. He has some of the best comebacks or some of the best lines out there, at least just for pure political entertainment. Como
Hmm.
cuando le dijo, they were talking about COVID-19 y le dice, we can't all live in our basements like you, Joe. I,
That's funny.
I thought that was pretty funny. The other one that was pretty funny was the one that you mentioned to me before, that he says that he was the least racist person in the room. He must have thought that he was giving a speech to the alt right.
Yeah, and then he says, "Oh, it's dark in here, so I can see, but I'm the least racist person." And then I was like, "Wait, was that a racist thing that you just said?"
Somebody should have told him that he was at the wrong meeting. This is not the neo-Nazi party meeting where he gets to say that.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous.
The other thing that's frustrating about Joe Biden is that not has he apologized for the 1994 crime bill? And he came. I feel like he came the closest yesterday when he said that the drug bill of the 80s and then the crime bill of 1994, they were big mistakes. But then he said that he didn't apologize, but he said the drug bill from the 80s was a big mistake. So he initially lumped them together, but then he only said that the drug bill from the 80s was a big mistake. But why doesn't he just come clean and say, look, I voted for it at the time, given the nature of what was going on. I thought it would help the nation, whatever, but I was wrong. It
Yeah.
it had devastating consequences, and I acknowledge them. I apologize to all the communities that it affected in a negative way, or do you think that opens him up to a lot of criticism if he goes that route?
I think it does. And I think in some ways it's unfair that, Joe Biden is kind of taking the heat for what basically so many other politicians around that time were also pushing, right? And again, we've talked about this, how it was in direct response to the more conservative law and order push and the criminalization of minorities. But, there were a number of prominent African American legislators who supported this bill as well. So I guess the good thing is that now there's a better appreciation and understanding of how unfair and how damaging that bill has been to communities of color, particularly the African American community and Black community.
He was the biggest cheerleader, but look, he doesn't have to take the responsibility all by himself. He
Hmm.
he can say exactly that. The Black Caucus was in favor of it. The other members of the Democratic and Republican Party were in favor of it. It was a team effort, but then he could say collectively we screwed up. it was a mistake.
Hmm.
¿Qué les cuesta? Es que les pesa. These politicians, they don't apologize. I mean, in that sense, they're no different than Trump. It's just like, okay, no apologies for the decisions that we made. We won't even, they might acknowledge what happened, but they're very quick at just changing the topic and maybe saying that other things were mistakes, but not, at least not, he didn't say clearly that 1994 crime bill was a mistake. Maybe he said it before, but I didn't hear it yesterday. He made a clear
Yeah,
distinction.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think he didn't say this week, but he did say it before. I guess back in January 22nd, I just pulled a Business Insider article where it states that former Vice President Joe Biden on Monday apologized for his past stances on criminal justice issues.
Okay.
So
Well,
I think
that's
he
good.
did it back in 2019 around Martin Luther King Day.
So why do you think then strategically then they don't think that it's a good thing to just keep repeating that?
I think right now is just to your point. I feel like there's so many people like right now it's just about getting the vote, like getting
But
your
but
base
but
to
that would
go
help
out.
them with the vote. Because that don't people like the story of redemption? Admit to your mistakes, admit to your flaws, and then there's redemption in that. I'm not saying that he's sorry about it. He probably doesn't care. I'm just saying that if he's trying to get votes, he doesn't think that's a worthy strategy.
Yeah, I think it does expose him to the argument of weakness, and not to say that we apologizing for doing something wrong is a sign of weakness, but unfortunately, when you are fighting and debating Trump, that is one thing that could be spent that way. So I think that there's that aspect of it. Like if I apologize, is this going to open me up for that argument? And then the other piece is that there's so many other important issues happening and that need to be covered that they just made a strategy to focus on healthcare and the economic recovery and then climate change, right? Because
Yep.
those are the things that will help excite the younger demographic that address the issue now, and also the obviously the big elephant in the room, the pandemic that
Mhm.
we're still dealing with and managing with. So I know that Joe Biden definitely did a better job at calling the president out on the mismanagement of the pandemic.
Yeah, but that's also a clear example of why I feel like the strategy that they're employing may not necessarily be the best because he is trying to draw a clear distinction between Trump and how the way that Trump handles things and the way that he would handle, especially the pandemic. And he has accused Trump in the past of being incapable of taking responsibility and admitting that he did something wrong, taking responsibility for the pandemic. Right? He wants to blame China and he wants to blame anything else. What better way than to say, here's a clear distinction between us? This man can't even admit that he made a mistake with the pandemic after thousands of lives has killed. And then within the context of talking about the crime bill, he could have mentioned that. I'm not saying that he should mention that he apologizes for it if it's not being discussed, but it was specifically discussed. His history and his vote on the crime bill. He could have tried to draw a distinction that says, I'm sorry for it. It affected a lot of lives. Being the big person here and admitting that I made a mistake, we collectively made a mistake, something that this other president is incapable of doing, or something like that. But then again, Trump would have just come back and said, "Well, it took you like 26
For
years
yeah.
to admit that you were wrong, and you're only giving me a year." Or I don't know if he would have said that, but
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, and why you're not advising the presidential campaign right now, it's beyond me.
I would have advised him to step down and let Bernie run.
Maybe that's why they didn't call you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. People like me, we're the last ones they want to call because they already know what we're gonna tell them.
That's
That's why
funny.
they want to avoid us like the plague. They don't want to talk about universal health care. They don't want to talk about ending wars and things like that.
The other highlight from this week was the fact that former President Obama came back strong and delivered a great speech in Philadelphia in front of Lincoln Field that I thought was a great way to highlight and differentiate the Democratic Party, from the Republican Party, highlighting the things that President Trump has done or has not done. So I thought that, once again, Obama has proved why he was such a great speech deliverer. And I think that, kind of miss having being able to hear him talk in a way that is both at a very high level visionary level, but also be very relatable and connecting themes in a very effective way in my perspective.
And it was a scathing speech. I mean, I listened to it yesterday as well, and I forgot how good of a speaker he is. I mean,
Yes.
exceptional. I kept thinking to myself, I wonder what would happen if Trump was debating this guy.
Oh
I
yeah, it would have been he would have been torn.
I think
I think
so.
because I think Obama always had that. I mean, he's such a yes, he's a politician, but I also think because he was an organizer, and I'm sure that through his organizing experience, he had to deal with so many things and having arguments, right? So I think he was just very good about being in the moment and responding through his instinct and being able to say and do things that a normal politician doesn't really do because they're careful. You don't want to
Hmm.
offend this part of the party, you don't want to offend this part of, you don't want to say this. But I just thought that it was a really good speech for sure.
And I'm very critical of Obama as well, but you have to give him credit for his oratory skills.
Yeah.
The part where he was talking about Trump, y le dice, they asked him, would you do anything different? And he said no. And he's like, he has a smile on his face. Really? No. It actually made me laugh because I forgot how funny he can be also when
Yeah.
he's delivering these speeches, and how he's able to connect with the people. And it already has 2.5 million views. That was yesterday, and that was the CNN link. There must be other links to it on YouTube and people hearing it through other social networks. But yeah, if it gets enough widespread consumption, it might make a difference. It might remind people of what it is that they liked about the Democratic Party 12 years ago when Obama ran, or even as early as 4 or 5 years ago when he was still in office. It might tap into that nostalgia of better times, and people
Yeah.
might vote, might lean Democratic, just to try to go back to those times. Even though I don't think we're going back to that, but and I don't, and even though I don't think that times are really that perfect, but at least the perception that people may have that things were a lot better back then.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought it was, we'll see if the timing, because in some ways it feels like the timing is just right because, it's just 10 days or about, at that time, it was about 12 days before the election, 12, 13 days before the election. So it's like soon enough that it can impact people's thinking as they're getting ready to vote. And obviously, there's people who are already voting. And it's also not early enough that it can just be forgotten or eventually lost in the and everything else that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. So I thought that the timing was great, and I think he had enough material and delivered it in such a way that I thought was effective. Although I do have to say that the honking was a little bit distracting at times.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if they applause, you can't really. If they applaud, you can't really hear them, so they have
Yeah,
to honk to make their presence known. Yeah,
yeah.
as I was listening to it, I thought, this guy's good. He should run for president.
He already has.
Okay, pues, any other? This was the final debate. No more. So, if you're out there and you haven't made up your mind, sorry, there's no more debates.
That's it. I guess just do your research and do what your heart tells you.
Okay, pues. All right. If you like our content, please make sure to subscribe and also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Brown Perspective TV. Nos vemos.
Ciao.